Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a new piece for this season. NFP player analysis on the Patreon section, brought to you by myself, Steve Wiss, and of course Jonathan Faduba. We did some of these last year, and holding our promise now for 2023. Hopefully, the first of many in-depth player analysis pieces. We're starting with Benie Traore. Currently playing for Häcken. Quite how much longer, we're not entirely sure. So the main man in the spotlight here, looking into this player, will be Jonathan. So yeah, you're first up in the chair, my friend.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. And welcome to, one of our player analysis pieces. Obviously, if you're a subscriber on Patreon, this is what we've promised in terms of bonus content. And we're looking to do a couple of these in the coming weeks, months, especially with the transfer window being open now in Sweden and Norway for the summer. So it's going to be plenty of ins, plenty of outs. And on the Nordic Football Podcast, of course, we're going to bring you some insight. If you haven't checked out our 10 to watch, of course, make sure you get on it. It's already been out for several months, and Steve, I think quite a few of the players have already left, haven't they? I saw another one of the 10 on your list has gone today to Belgium. So if you haven't seen that already, then of course, hopefully you're getting value from that, because we called these players several months ago, and many of them have made multi-million-pound moves already. So I think combined, Steve, already we're probably pushing about 20 million euros from the players we've picked in the past 3 months in terms of player sales. So the aim of this show with Benie Traore is to just look at a couple of players who've been linked with moves abroad, or players that you should probably know about, and talk about them in a bit more detail, because obviously on the main show, Steve, we talk about them, don't we? But maybe not in as much focus as we can on this special bonus episode. So I guess you might be wondering why I've picked Benie Traore.
Well, I'm not actually, because we are starting with a player who has taken the Allsvenskan by storm this season. His statistics have been excellent. 12 goals scored in 14 appearances so far. A former 10 to watch, I do believe, Jonathan. So as my quails start quailing in the background, they're obviously enjoying a bit of Benie Traore. But, I mean, would you say he's been quite sensational this season so far?
Yeah, of course. As I say, I picked Benie Traore, player analysis number 1. Now, one of the main reasons for this is because I believe that he will be on the move quite soon, a bit like your animals there in the background. I think he will be on the move. There's links with several clubs at the moment, which I'm sure you're going to ask me about in a minute, Steve. But the first thing, obviously, to touch on is, who is this player? Now, we've put together a few stats, haven't we, Steve, which we're going to sort of show on the screen shortly, just outlining his age, his position, how many goals he scored, etc. So, Stevie, I don't know if you're going to take that away, but basically he's a 20-year-old forward, and that's what we're going to debate in a minute in terms of his position. Is he actually an out-and-out striker or not? And we've got his stats, some of his key stats there as well, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Steve, you're going to ask me about some of them. But the main question is, why are we talking about Benie Traore? As you mentioned, their top goal scorer in Allsvenskan for 1, obviously. For 2, he's linked with a lot of clubs. Now, the main clubs at the moment, so if you're a fan of Celtic, Rangers, you might be watching this thinking, who might you be getting? Because a lot of reports suggesting that official bids have been made by both clubs in the old firm. So could he be on his way to Scotland? If you're a supporter of a team in Belgium, of course, Anderlecht are reported to have made a big offer for him. And Belgian clubs are never too far away from Scandinavia, are they, Steve? I think there's also a bid came in from Union Saint-Gilloise, who are the owners of course, who Brighton, of course, own. Tony Bloom owns Brighton, owns that club there. The Belgian club is sort of a multi-club model, isn't it, in Belgium with Brighton. And the other links, Sheffield United have sort of been one of the other main players involved in this talk. So that's 4 or 5 clubs there that are really strongly interested. And there's a lot of reports, Steve, at the moment coming out of Sweden to suggest that he probably, by the end of this transfer window, the transfer window opens 7th of July in Sweden. And the suggestion is that he won't be around by the time it closes in a month's time. So that's why we're going to talk about him. And you can see there his goals and assists and things like that, which, Steve, I'm sure you're going to ask me about. And we'll have a little discussion about him as a player all around. What can maybe these fans expect?
Yeah, what we will do first of all is actually nail down his position, because, and this is according to transfer marks, which can sometimes be vague. But accordingly, he has played 20 times as a centre forward, 19 times as a right winger, 3 times as a left winger, and then a handful of times in like official right midfield and left midfield spots, which don't really exist anymore in football, really, do they? But I mean, what is he? I mean, he scored a lot of goals as a striker, but do you think he's an out-and-out number 9, or is he someone who, is quite easily capable out wide as well?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we've talked about it a few times on the podcast. Like, what's his natural position? I think to answer that, I would say that I believe he was signed as a wide player initially. Obviously, comes from Ivory Coast, and when he signed, I think he was originally thought of as being a winger, predominantly right-sided winger. He was described as very exciting and talented by Hackens' then sporting director. He was given a 4-year contract from ASEC Mimosas. Obviously, anyone who's familiar with African football will know the legendary ASEC Mimosas. It's the academy where the Traores came from, Didier Drogba, and many other top African talents over the years from Ivory Coast. And he kind of came in as everyone thought would probably be a winger. He did actually play as a striker in pre-season in 2022. Steve, and there were suggestions that maybe that's where his natural position would be. Obviously, Yeremieff was the main striker at that point, the main forward, but then he had a really bad injury and he missed the entire 2022 season. So maybe there was actually plans in pre-season to move him into the central role. And if they had done that, Steve, who knows how that might have, if he hadn't have got injured, who knows how that might have played out with Yeremieff. Maybe they might have played 2 up front. It could have maybe completely altered their dynamic for that title-winning season. So sometimes maybe these things happen for a reason. But he's come in this season. Obviously, Yeremieff has been sold to Greece, and he's come in as their main out-and-out striker. There's no other real replacement. They've got Ola Kamara, but he's barely played a game. Traore's been their man, and he's shown in Allsvenskan that he can play as an out-and-out striker. Very good. He's actually stronger than people give him credit for in terms of height. He's not the tallest. And I think that's the main drawback in terms of maybe long-term, is he going to be a striker? I think he can do it in Allsvenskan, Steve. But if you were to move to a tougher league, I think that's a one clear weakness probably in his game. He's not an out-and-out target man who's going to hold the ball up. I think even in some games this season, Steve, obviously I was lucky enough to be at the in Gothenburg about a month or so ago, 2 months ago, and I saw him play against Djurgården, against physical defenders like Danielson, who were quite tall and strong. And he did sort of struggle a little bit, but where he differentiates from those bigger players is he's quite nippy and speedy. So what he lacks for maybe in height and that sort of chest control, ability to hold the ball up, he more than makes up for in sort of strength and speed of movement. Now, in terms of a striker, he's a striker who he has to play for a team that plays on the front foot. He's not going to be a player who's like a Drogba type, who's going to hold the ball up and allow the team to sort of push up forward. He's going to be a type of player that Hackens' style is a 4-3-3, very attacking, very sort of like get everyone forward, fly forward, kind of maybe a bit like perhaps Liverpool in the early days on the clock with like Mane and Salah, that kind of fluid forward line. And I think that's what he suits. So if he was going to a team, Steve, I would say either he's going to play either it will be a 2-man strike force and he'll play as like the 9 off someone, maybe running in behind, or they'd have to maybe change the tactics slightly. Because I think in a more physical league, he that's an area of his game that he might not suit. But as you can see from the statistics there, of course, 12 goals. He's got an XG of 10.66. He can get assists as well, 3 assists. He's had 37 shots in Allsvenskan, 2.54 per 90 minutes. So he's clearly getting in good positions. And 61.2% of his shots are on target in the last calendar year. So that tells you that he knows where the net is. And he's capable of, he's only, I think, scored 3 penalties. So I think 8 of his goals are non-penalty goals. So this is clearly a player, Steve, with a lot of talent. And just in terms of his actions, in terms of getting into the penalty area, he also registers pretty well in terms of touches in the box per 90, 4.46 touches in the box per 90 on average, according to Y-Scout. So that tells you this is someone who's comfortable in the box and getting in on the end of chances. And with the midfielder Hacken have, he kind of feasts on the chances that they create for him.
12 goals scored from 10.66 expected goals this season. I like those statistics. He's slightly overachieving there, but also he's getting obviously into some great positions to score goals. I think that's a great mix. The statistic which stands out to me at an astronomical level actually is his shots on target in the last calendar year. Over 61%. That's unbelievable levels of accuracy. He only averages 2.54 shots per 90 minutes, which is not a huge number for a striker as such. His selectivity, it has to be a major strength. He seems to know when to actually fire at goal, because, maybe it's just a snapshot in 12 months, but this is impressive accuracy, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think part of that reason, Steve, is he's playing in a really good team that create chances for him as well. He's not someone who's taking wild shots from outside the box. He's careful with how when he shoots. He can dribble as well, so he can move his body into good areas. Like, for example, if crosses are coming into the box, he can kind of get in front of a defender and quickly fire in the 6-yard box. He can go front post. He can go back post. He can wait it around the penalty area or maybe the penalty spot and kind of finish from 18 yards. So he's very deadly inside that penalty area, that's for sure. And he's got the speed to sort of get away from a defender if you're not quick enough to get in there and sort of follow him around. I think that's one of his strengths. He benefits, like I say, from that amazing midfield. Obviously, Hacking and have really good fullbacks as well, who get into the box and create crosses, cutbacks. So they kind of create from all areas, really, out wide, fullbacks, the midfield. So he is kind of fortunate in a way as well to be in such a creative team. I wonder if he had to do it himself, would he be as effective? And I do have one or two concerns in terms of his next level, where he goes next. Where would he go? Is he the sort of player that he needs the team to be built around him? And are we seeing a player who's had the team almost built to his style? The manager's got the absolute best out of him in terms of how the game and the team plays. Is he going to get that at, like, say, a Celtic or Rangers? Are they going to mould the whole team around him? Is Sheffield United, it's going to be much harder for him to build the team around him. And is he ready for that sort of level? I think he's ready for somewhere like Scotland. I think maybe it might be a slight upgrade on Allsvenskan, but I'm not entirely sure it really is. I'd argue maybe a lot of the Allsvenskan teams are probably better than a lot of the SPL teams, to be honest, but maybe the top two teams could do quite well in Allsvenskan, depending on how you look at it. So I think that'd be a fine move for him. I think Belgium would be a fine move for him. Premier League, not quite sure yet. Sheffield, I think that's a big step up. But clearly, this is a player with real talent. And as you said there, he's very careful how he places his shots. And he's not a rash player, Steve. And I think that at 20 years old shows a lot of maturity, because you often get players who are that age who are very rash with their chances. They'll be shooting from anywhere. They're as soon as they're clear on goal. One thing about Traore, Steve, he's very calm when he gets in. Like, let's say he's in behind the defence, he's very calm. He's not someone who's just going to thrash at chances. Sometimes he gets strikers, even in the Premier League, who you don't know what they're going to do when they're 1-on-1 or when they're sort of like in a 2v1 situation. You think, like, here we go, what's he going to do? They need to find their feet. They take ages. I even remember Cristiano Ronaldo, Steve, when he was sort of 19, 20, he needed time to adapt to like final third actions. Traore is very efficient in his final third actions, and that does bode well for the future. So I can totally understand the interest in him, and he is a very efficient striker, as you've mentioned there.
Before we sign off about this player, I suppose we do have to mention that he did miss a year of football due to injury, a cruciate ligament injury. He seems to have come back really well from it. But is that an area of maybe slight concern, Jonathan, at all going forward? Perhaps if he went to a more physical league. Scotland can be brutal, can't it? Premier League is a different sort of level. If you were sort of, in the recruitment business, well, you are, aren't you, actually? But if you were, say, a Premier League club, would that be a little bit of a question mark, or would you be looking at what he's done on the field in the last 6-7 months and thinking he's well over that now?
I think it's a tribute to sort of modern medicine, isn't it? I think he doesn't show any signs of having such a long-term injury. I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head, actually, whether it was a leg break or a ACL. I would need to double check that. But he certainly, he missed a long time. And when he came back, Steve, when he scored his first goal, I think it was in that game. I think there was one game against Degerfors where he scored a few goals, and he said that when he came back, and I think it was the opening game against Elfsborg, he missed the chance, and then I think in the next game of the season he scored, and he was basically saying that it was the Hammarby game. You remember that howler, the goalkeeper howler, where he sort of missed the ball completely, and then Traore tapped it in. He kind of said after that God gave him that goal as a reward for the amount of time he'd been waiting, and kind of you get the sense that he had a lot of nerves coming back into the team. Such a long time out, and he had to bide his time. But I think he's taken it with remarkable maturity. In terms of, like you say, recruitment and other clubs, I wouldn't be massively worried. I think he's shown he's robust enough. Injuries can always happen, can't they, Steve? There's no player that's guaranteed to stay injury free. Is there at the end of the day? So it's hard to say that. Obviously, once you've had one recurring injury, then they can reoccur. But he hasn't really shown any signs of that. I mean, one thing to bear in mind, obviously, for maybe recruitment point of view, obviously, how can play on an artificial surface, and how would he adapt maybe on grass surfaces? There's a big divide between a lot of the teams in Allsvenskan between grass and artificial. So maybe that's something to think about. But he's obviously proved he can play on artificial surfaces. And I think maybe, I mentioned that mentality and that character, Steve. If there was one maybe criticism, not criticism, but there was a criticism from his manager actually earlier in the season, when it's maybe that he's sometimes a bit too nice, if that makes sense. Now, there was an incident earlier in the season where there was a penalty awarded to Hacken, and he let Aman Romeo take it, and Aman Romeo missed the penalty. And Pimitis Hogma came out afterwards and said, like, what are you doing to Benie Traore? Like, you should be the penalty taker. And apparently, Benie Traore said to him he wanted Romeo to score to sort of boost the morale of the team. Now, you wouldn't get sort of Ronaldo in that, would you? Or you wouldn't get sort of like a Van Nistelrooy or a top striker doing that. He seems very unselfish and very sort of kind and giving. And Hogma was not happy about it at all. He was like, you need to sort of take your responsibilities. And he had a massive go at him, actually. So that's the one area I'd say. Is he kind of is he a hungry striker from that point of view, or is he sort of a happy-go-lucky player? And that's what makes me sometimes think, is he a bit more of a provider? Is he more comfortable sort of setting up other people? But all in all, he's a really good player, and it doesn't surprise me that we're hearing so much rumours, Stephen. Could be the last few weeks that we see him at the time of recording. Could be the last few weeks we see him in Allsvenskan.
Where do you think he should go next, then, in your personal opinion? I mean, I was also going to sort of mention, are there any major weaknesses in his game, perhaps linked to whatever club he ended up at? Like you said before, maybe he needs to be the right fit for the club. Like, he certainly doesn't sound like he would suit, a counter-attacking sort of unit where he's the lone front man and he's having to do a lot of physical work like that. So what sort of league, what sort of level would be really good for his next level of development?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it seems like sometimes this is just driven by who's the most interested, isn't it? And at the moment, it really looks like the most interested teams are in Scotland, which is quite curious to me, really. I'm surprised maybe, for example, Netherlands. We know that Ajax, they had scouts at the Gothenburg Derby to watch him. He's got a contract till 2026, so it's no urgency to sort of sell. Their sporting director, Martin Eriksson, has come out and said there's a good chance he will be sold this summer, but it depends on what the bid is. It has to be something very good. It would have to be historic amounts, he even said, for us to sell him. Is that sort of mind games? Is that kind of trying to tempt the bid, or is that genuine? Hacken aren't the sort of team that really need money. They've got the Gothia Cup, they've got the Champions League coming in, and that's going to make them a lot of money, of course, for the first time in their history. So I don't think they really have an imperative to sell. He's their best striker. If they're going to win the league this year and retain the title, they absolutely need Traore, really. They can't be affording to sell him and trying to replace him, really. So I don't think there's an imperative to sell, but clearly, Steve, the economy is going to dictate things. According to the reports that we have heard, Steve, there's been bids of 38 million crowns, Swedish crowns, which is about, I think, £2.5 million, £2 million roughly, between 2 and 3 million, which have been turned down. So that's reportedly either Rangers, Celtic, or Sheffield United. The rumour, according to Football Skanalen, is that, GP, Gothenburg Post, is that they want £5 million Hacken to sell Traore, which is a fair amount of money. But I guess these Sheffield United, Rangers and Celtic have that sort of money. In my personal opinion, Steve, his next best step would be Ajax. I think that would be a fantastic move for him. I think it's a level that he could play at. I think it's a big club, so they can kind of mould their game around him. And it's also a league that I think he could flourish in. Scotland's a more physical league. I think he would be fine, but I think he might have to adapt in terms of his position. I'm not sure if he could play as an out-and-out striker in a physical league like that, or the Premier League at the moment. I think he needs to maybe improve his game a little bit more in other areas, such as holding a ball up. But there's no doubt about it. This is a 20-year-old player, Steve. By the time he's 22, 23, I think if he carries on his trajectory and keeps improving, I do think he's a potential Premier League player.
Can you do it on a cold winter's night at Ross County or Inverness? I'm not sure about that one. I'm not sure about many would fancy that, in fairness. But Benie Traore, we think the future is very bright for this young man. Côte d'Ivoire, hopefully he'll end up with several caps for them down the years. We don't think he's the next Didier Drogba, but he could be a long way towards being a national team legend potentially. Final thoughts on Traore, Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm really interested to see his career trajectory because I think the jury's out on him. I think he needs to pick a good coach, whoever the next manager he works with. I think he's very moldable, Steve. I think he's malleable, and that's very exciting for a coach. You know, I think he can be molded to different styles. I think he could continue to play as a 9. I think he could maybe, you mentioned Ivorian sort of top players, Solomon Kalou. He could be converted into a sort of a wide forward who maybe cuts inside like Kalou did. So I think there's the world is oyster really, Benie Traore, and he's a really fan favorite. When I was at the game in Gothenburg, the fans at the end of the match, they were singing his name for literally about 2-3 minutes. They even recorded it, put it on Twitter. They sing Benie Traore, ole ole ole, and he was loving it. He was laughing it up. So he's a really popular player. The fans love him, and the world's his oyster. But of course, I think the next step in his career is going to be a big one, and for his sake, I just hope it's a move that suits him for his career, not kind of a move that is driven by maybe the club having to sell or driven by an agent or whatever. I hope it's a move that is really right for his career, because I think if he gets the next move right and he develops, I think there is definitely a Premier League player in there somewhere in the future.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this piece on Benie Traore. Thank you very much for your thoughts, Jonathan. There will be more player profiles coming out throughout the season here for you Patreon subscribers. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you next time.